always be 10 minutes late or 20 minutes early?
I'm nervous. What I'll say is that as a married man, this is not always in my control. So if I went with the 20 minutes early approach, in order to fulfill that, I wouldn't like the person that I would have to become. So even though I don't want to be someone that's always late, that's always 10 minutes late. I also don't want to be pushy about getting there so early that it actually didn't matter. So I think I'm going to go with 10 minutes late and just suffer a bad reputation for always being late.
I think a lot of it depends on the culture you're in as well, because I think being 10 minutes late is not even late in Italy, but in New Zealand, it probably would be, like if they're 10, 15 minutes, if it's a dinner, even half an hour, whatever. But I quite like the question because it's kind of like 20 minutes early is just like awkwardly early, if you know what I'm saying. Like it's just a little bit too early. 10 minutes early, it's like, oh yeah, they're punctual. 20 minutes, it's like,
And the host's kind of looking at you like, what are you doing here? They're like smiling, being like, come on in, it's nice to see you. But they're like, I still haven't vacuumed the floor. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? Get out of here.
Exactly.
And then there's also the aspect of like, okay, so being 10 minutes late, normally if you're going to a friend's house or a game night or something like that, it's no big deal. Some people might be offended by it. But when there's things like appointments, right? Or every now and then we'll do talks at a conference or a convention or something like that. Being 10 minutes late to those is profoundly rude, right? Like there's people waiting for you and there's an expectation that you'll show up on time, not wasting everyone else's time. So in scenarios like that, even though you're only 10 minutes late, if you add up all the 10 minutes that everyone's waiting for you, it might be hours, that the collective body of people are waiting for you.
This one's easy for me because I am usually early anyway. So I hate being late. Like I start getting a little bit stressed out if I'm running late to an appointment or whatever it might be. But I mean, if you're early, you just wait in your car, right? Like you don't have to go in early. You just arrive early. There's some prime time for playing board games on your phone right there. Sit in the car for 20 minutes. But being late, it's just like, it stressed me out. I'd feel like I'm unreliable. I feel like I'm like making other people wait for me. Because that's like, I've been in situations when you get there like say 5 or 10 minutes early and then the other person's like 20 minutes late. So you're waiting like close to half an hour for this person to show up. And that's not fun. Like you feel kind of like they don't really care that I'm waiting for them. I wouldn't want to be that person.
So if you've selected that answer, you are going to be waiting half an hour for me every time.
Yeah, I'm used to
it. I think the longest I've had to wait for someone was like an hour and a half. So I was about half an hour early and they were about an hour late, I think. So that was not fun at all. But yeah, I think the question is, do you prefer to waste your own time or everyone else's time? Because essentially that's what it is, right? You're either wasting 10 minutes of everyone else's time every time you have an appointment or whatever, or you're deciding to waste 20 minutes of your own time. I would prefer to be 20 minutes early, but I have to say, like, I've changed a lot in terms of punctuality after having kids as well. Because me and Alice are both people who used to show up early to things. We used to be like on time. I remember one time we were going to dinner at a friend's place and we were so early that we're like, okay, we need to just go for a walk around the area because we're way too early. We can't knock at their door now. But since having kids, we're like 10, 20, half an hour late, just because you underestimate how long it takes to get out the door. You're like, oh yeah, we'll get up at this time and get ready and then we'll go. And then you're like, wow, I underestimated that by like half an hour, and then you're late.
Yeah. And that's ultimately why I picked my answer, is because I don't like being a person that says, all right, come on guys, get on with it. We need to go. And making everyone else feel rushed and making everyone else feel hurried. So if I could somehow be really patient and relaxed and still manage to make it to things on time, like 20 minutes early, I would go with that, because I don't necessarily want to make people wait for me. But at the same time, I don't want to push people to get on with it, hurry. I just think that doesn't create the coolest environment, the nicest environment.
And Sam knows this from experience from hanging out with me in our younger years of being on like tour and stuff with bands, where I'm the one who's like, come on, get out of bed, let's go, we've got things to do. There's a time I remember like we did a little North Island tour in New Zealand with another band, and I think our band was in one room, their band was in a different room. They were a little bit younger than us, maybe just a bit below you, Sam. And I was awake at like 6 or something, ready to go, had a shower, let's get moving, let's drive home for like 8 hours, whatever it might be. And then I think like our guys they got up kind of at a good time, 7:30, 8 o'clock. And then we hadn't heard from the other band at all by like 8:39. So I just walked into their room with like, I think I had a phone and just like blasted music at them, like, get out of bed, get up, get ready, let's go. Like, I don't mind being that bad guy if we've got things we need to do. So I'm used to it.
I do remember that now, actually. I totally forgotten, but I do remember you just like rocking up with it was like some metalcore music, right? Just cranking it.
I think it was actually the song from Nacho Libre. Just
was
like
it?
full volume.
Okay.
Yeah.
There was another time where we had like a gamers weekend and we sort of completely changed our sleep schedule. We rented this really nice place. We were playing games for, maybe it was 3 nights or something like that. And on the last night, we started a game of Bitoku at midnight, me and another friend or 2 friends. And so needless to say, we went to bed really, really late. And when we woke up, the next morning was the cleanup morning. Shem had nearly done the whole cleanup of the place. And we felt so, so bad. Like, yo, we did not help this guy at all. I'm like, are we going to be able to come back? Like, is he still going to want to do this with us? Sorry, bro.
I would have done it purely out of boredom. Like, probably woke up at like 5:30, 6 o'clock and like, just do some stuff because I'm just waiting around. So that's pretty normal for me. Wake up early and start working straight away. There's stuff to do.
So I have a follow-up question. You've organized something at your house. I don't know, it's a dinner, it's a game night, it's whatever. And do you prefer that your guests are 20 minutes early or 10 minutes late?
I prefer them to be on time. Thank you very much. Please and thank you.
That's a great way to dodge the question, Jim.
Yeah, welcome. Probably 10 minutes late, though, to be fair. Like, I don't mind a little bit of tardiness, especially for like an evening dinner event or a lunch event or something. But for an appointment that's like, you're meant to be there at a certain time, let's say a dentist or something, like, that's the worst one when you show up early for a dentist and then they make you wait 15 minutes. That's always frustrating. But if people come around to my house for something, they can be like 5-10 minutes late. That's fine. Like, that's kind of expected, I guess, to a point. If they're super early, then like Sam said earlier, like you start panicking, like, oh, I haven't vacuumed, I haven't done this, all these things to do. And it depends on how well you know them, right? Like if they're family or if they're friends, new friends, old friends, makes a big difference.
There's a point where lateness is kind of contagious. And I've seen this with my game group. So we've got a little group text, right? And one of them says, oh, sorry, guys, caught up with work or dinner ran late or something. So I'm going to be about half an hour late. And everyone's like, oh, yeah, all good, all good. And so then that person rocks up half an hour late. They arrive and they're like, where's everyone else? No one else is here yet. Like, what the heck? Like, so everyone else thinks they get a pass that they can be late because this other guy has said that he's going to be late.
Welcome to the Lens and Veil podcast. Join Shem, Sam, and Zach as they dive into a designer-focused analysis of SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, a game from Tomáš Holek.
So SETI is a game about discovering or hoping to discover alien life out there in the universe. Players are sending out probes. They're trying to land on moons and orbit planets and ultimately search for signs of life out there in the game. So it's a game where you're very much spending resources on each round, trying to survive the round as long as you can by using your cards, your energy, and your credits and other resources to take actions, and the round ends once everyone essentially passes. So the game is played over 5 rounds, and it's going to feel similar to games like Lost Ruins of Arnak. I guess even some of our games like Paladins, where you have to try and prolong your rounds, or like Hadrian's Wall. So at the start of the round, you are gaining some resources. You get some during setup, and then you get them at the end of the round as income. So you're going to start with some resources, start with some cards in hand, and you're going to be taking 1 action on your turn, and you can take some minor actions as well. There's a flurry of different actions you can take. Some of them include playing a card from your hand, which often has a credit cost. Other actions include sending out probes from your player board to Earth to then move them around the solar system, and then either to orbit a planet or to land on a planet or a moon. Other actions include where you can scan from certain locations in the solar system for signs of life, and you get data from these stars that you then scan. There's also a resource in the game called publicity, which you get from various means. And there's one action that's tied directly to that where you can spend 6 publicity to gain an upgrade. And these are these cool little tiles that you slot into specific slots of your player board to buff the 3 kind of main actions of the game. So the 3 main areas of the game that you're trying to focus on. The first one is to get your probes out into the solar system and ultimately land on planets and moons or to orbit the planets. The other one is all about those scanning of the stars. So you're kind of using various methods to scan, often from Earth or from Mercury, or from a specific place on a card, like a red zone or a blue zone, different star colors. And the other action is about getting these data tokens, filling up this little row on your player board. Then once you fill that board, you can then take this action to essentially take one of the 3 colored benefits tied to the aliens. And that really is the main focus of the game, is that there are these spots where you're trying to place your discs, your player color discs, out by these aliens. And they come in 3 colors. You've got the pink, which was mostly tied to the stars, the scanning, the yellow, which is tied to the planets, and the blue, which is tied to your data that you collect mostly from getting the stars and from other places as well. Once an alien has one of each of those colors placed by any players or by a neutral player, the alien is discovered, essentially. We read some new rules, we find some new things to add to the game, and now there's this new alien we can interact with, essentially, where you can also place these pink, yellow, and blue tokens on those aliens. And there's 2 aliens in each game. There are 5 total, and I'm guessing there's going to be more coming from expansions. So you shuffle them up, you put them face down. You don't know what aliens are going to be in the game, but they add a bunch of sort of variability and replayability to the game, different rules that come in from game to game, which is quite cool. After 5 rounds, it's all about most points wins. You get a lot of points during the game, and depending on your playstyle, you might also get quite a few points at the end of the game. There are sort of goals, public goals that players will compete for. They're essentially multipliers for certain things you've done in the game. And every 25 points, or the first lot of 25 points and the second or the third, you score, you'll get to claim one of these benefits to score later. There are also some cards that will score you points at the end of the game, and then that's basically it. That's most points wins. This game has, it must be over 200 cards, I think. I haven't checked the count, but it's a lot of cards. I think every card is unique to some degree. So it's going to give similar vibes to a game like Ark Nova or Terraforming Mars, where there's a big deck of cards, and a lot of the variability of the game comes from that. At its heart, it's sort of a Euro resource management, push you around as far as you can to do as much as you can, engine building kind of game. So maybe we should dive in first just to touch on some of the unique elements of the game. There are some cool things that they've done from a production point of view, which are very interesting. But maybe we can also just talk about some of the other mechanisms in the game that we found either new or fresh, or at least kind of a nice spin on a pre-existing one that we know about. The big, I guess, gimmick, not to sound negative, but the big gimmick in the game is this rotating solar system. So there are 3 disks or rings around the sun, which the planets are then positioned on, printed onto these disks. And anytime that you have to rotate these disks, the game will tell you which one to rotate. And what ends up happening is that the top one rests on the second one rests on the third one. So anytime you spin, say, the third one, all those disks are moving one space clockwise. So that means that the ones on the inner, close to the sun, are going to spin a lot faster, which can create this kind of chaos in the game where, like, your probe's in one spot and suddenly it's flowing to the other spot, spin around the board where you weren't expecting. This is quite a cool feature, though. I'm sure we've got some thoughts about it, but how do you guys feel about this one new kind of thing of the game?
From one side, like, it was cool, it added a little bit of uncertainty into your planning. But I think at the same time, I'm not sure it scales particularly well between player counts, because if you're in 2-player, probably the most it can spin between your turn and your next turn is once, if the other player does an action that spins the galaxy, or like you could spin it once and then the other player spins it once. If you're playing in 4-player, it can spin 3 times, so you can spin each of the center one, the middle one, and the largest one could all be spin before it's your turn again. So that kind of would really mess up your planning in a way that would not feel particularly good, because you can maybe foresee it to a certain extent, because you can see that people have maybe enough popularity to buy the research tile, which is going to spin the galaxy. But there's also a lot of cards that just, if you do the card, it's going to spin the galaxy around. So I think it's kind of cool, but at the same time, a bit of a caveat there of being like, it doesn't feel to me like it scales particularly well, and especially in higher player counts, it can be maybe a bit random feeling.
Yeah, I agree. And I want to touch on the scaling later. I think there's a really big conversation around scaling, but the system itself, I think, is really interesting. I think it does a good job of simulating, roughly what the physics is like of the movement of planets. Now, we can't ever have Mercury closer or further away in this system. So it doesn't really simulate Mercury and Venus, the planets that are closer to the sun than us, because they're on the same level of disk. But I think it does a really good job of simulating the outer planets. So Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune. I think it's really cool. And the fact that occasionally asteroids show up and comets show up, I think that's a really nice nod to some of the cool little phenomenon going on in our solar system. So I think that was a really fun system that, yes, it's a gimmick, but I think it's a functional gimmick that has both thematic use and also with a simpler set of components. I don't think it could have been done. So I quite like it. Now, I do want to talk about the scaling later, but I think that there is a cool puzzle around waiting with your probes for the movement of the planets to get closer for the opportune timing, and also just getting in there straight away now. And actually, maybe sometimes with your sequencing of your action, because of the way that there are free actions in the game that allow you to move, you might actually be inefficient with your resources, spending more energy now to make sure that you move onto the planet while it's close, because you know that possibly when it's not your turn, it's going to move further away. And I really like that tension. Do you greed and hope that it doesn't move? Or do you go right now, spend a few more extra resources perhaps, because you might have cheaper ways of getting movement, but it'll be a main action rather than a free action? And I think that's a cool puzzle for players to interact with.
Yeah, I think that's why it works mechanically. Like, it definitely is a gimmick and a novel production feature, which is cool because games need to have something that makes them stand out from other games visually. You know, like, it's quite important that, oh, that's the game with the spinning solar system, right? Like, people remember it. It looks good on the table, it looks colorful and bright. But I think the fact that, like you're saying, Sam, but as a player, there's that cool decision around, like, well, each turn I get one action, right? Like, I can do some minor actions, but it's one action. So right now, my probe's not in a good position. So maybe I'll play this card now on this turn rather than move it. And hopefully next turn it's moved one space. If it hasn't, oh, can I push it one more round, one more turn? So, like, that's good for a player, that they kind of think, oh, I've got some control of this. I can see what way it's going to spin. Hopefully it moves one space before my next turn, but maybe it won't. But you do have that little element of kind of control. Now, as Zach said, like, if it spins 3 spaces, then, well, everything's changed. But at that point, there's still a lot of options out there, right? Like, you're talking about trying to get to a planet or a moon to land on. You've got options. But the downside, I think, is when you have a card that says, oh, get to Venus and you'll get this benefit. That's when it would feel a bit stake when you've been trying to get there. So there's some card play stuff in there that gives you goals that you might actually, in a way, kind of sabotage yourself because you're really trying to do this one thing and then the solar system spins and it's not really a thing anymore.
Yeah, or with the scanning the systems, because your main kind of scanning action uses Earth sector and then the 2 sectors next to it. And so if, like, 3 people spin it and you were set up to do something, then it just becomes particularly hard to do that action in the way that you're planning to. I think, as you were explaining, Shem, it is a very tactical game. So you kind of have to pick your moments and just do the best thing that you can on your turn. So in that way, this whole spinning galaxy thing feeds into that. You have a strategy, but you also just have to react to how the board moves.
You know, I can definitely recall a moment where I had, like, it was perfectly set up for me for the thing I needed to do, right? Like, it was in the position I needed it to be. But I really wanted to play a card first because it was going to be more, like, resource efficient to do it. But I knew if I didn't do what I had to on the board right now, like, Sam would probably do something which would then spin it or do something different. So, like, it was inefficient to do that action straight away, but I did it anyway because I was so scared of the solar system moving. So I like that. It adds that tension, and that while it's chaos, the player feels like they have some level of control on their turn at least.
Do we want to touch on the cards in this game? Because I think that is one of the standout mechanics in this game. We have cards that are multi-use to the nth degree. So I can think of 5 uses for cards. There might be a 6th, but I don't know. There's really a lot of uses for cards. So the main sort of thing that they do is they will have either an ability or immediate effect or maybe some in-game scoring. And actually, they'll always have an immediate effect, if I remember correctly. Sometimes it will be a main action that it just lets you do. Maybe it's cheaper or with some sort of rules tweak. They'll have that, which you have to pay credits for. It'll be something like 0 to 3 credits. And that's the main use for this credit resource, is to either launch your probes or buy these cards. So you'll play them down in front of you. But you could also discard cards from your hand for one of the top left, I think it is, or maybe top right, one of the little discard effects, which can give you either 1 publicity, 1 data, or a free move, and all of those are free actions. So if a card's useless to you, you can always discard it for one of those things, which are non-trivial. They're like quite good. You can always spend 2 cards or 2 of any of the same resource, but you could always spend 2 cards to gain another resource, an energy or a credit. If you take the scan action, if you've got a particular technology, you can also discard a card from your hand to scan the matching color region. Maybe you really need to scan around Neptune, and it might be in the black region. You discard a card from your hand with the black, and you can scan that region. And the final use for cards is that you can tuck them for income via various effects throughout the game. You can find these effects which allow you to tuck a card for income, which is going to give you either credits or energy or a card income. And you also get that resource immediately, which is a really nice little Brucey bonus to add that in there. You're losing the card, you're gaining income, but you also gain the thing right now so that you can plan for more stuff on this round. So what did you guys think about the cards in this game?
Well, our first play, Sam, I missed the rule about when you tuck a card for income that you get it straight away. That is a huge rule to miss. And it's quite obvious in the rulebook. It's like drawn out in a bigger blue box. Sam picked it up, I think, in round 2 of our second game, which was very crucial because honestly, I think the game drops quite a few ratings for me if that rule is not there. But the fact that you can get this little benefit to tuck a card at some point, you can't really lean into it too hard, but there are a few ways that you can. Through the blue data track, you can kind of get it more often, or I think it's mostly by orbiting planets as well. But if you can get that benefit, like tucking the right card at the right moment is great. Like, it gets me 1 more energy right now, or 1 more card, and there's a certain card right there on the table, which is great for me. I know it's just random anyway, but there's some really nice moments where like, actually tucking this card isn't what I need right now, but that 1 resource it gives me right at this moment is what I need right now. Which is cool. I like that a lot. I'm glad we found that rule because it would have made a much different impression on me, I think, if we didn't notice that rule. But no, there's a lot going on. I didn't often use the discard effects too much, but there were also one final use, I think, to mention, is there are quite a few cards that will let you discard cards for certain things or whatever it might be. So maybe not too many cards, but in our last play, I definitely noticed it where if I play this card, it said like discard a card and do this thing. So that was also great as well.
I enjoyed the card play. I think in our second game, I had heaps of in-game scoring cards, and I remember Sam saying he basically didn't see any. So, I mean, it's kind of a big deck. You have to deal with whatever cards you get. But I think a huge chunk of my points came from these in-game scoring cards that I had. And because I had them, I played my game around them, and I tried to score as many points off them as I could. The game before that, I had a whole bunch of these mission cards. So the ones with the yellow boxes, they score you in-game points. Once you've played the card, you've gained the instant bonus, but then at the end of the game, you score for a certain thing. There's these other ones that have a grey box, and they're kind of like a mission. Once you complete the mission, you get something. So in the first game, I had a whole bunch of mission cards. And so I was playing these cards down and then trying to complete these missions. And then just generally, you're not only able to sometimes take cards from the 3 cards that are open on the table, but you also, when you pass, you get to look at a stack of player count +1 of cards. And so whatever your strategy is or whatever you're trying to push in the game, you do feel like you've got a few ways to get cards that will help you with that. And that's what I found, at least in my plays, is that I was able to find some cards that synergize with what I was trying to do. Yeah, I didn't really use them for their discard effects very much, apart from I remember one of the alien species that we unlocked where I did not want to do it all what their cards did, but they gave 2 popularity if I discarded them, so I was just using them to gain popularity, to then research stuff. So yeah, I did in the second game do a lot of the discarding 2 cards for a resource, or discarding 2 of a resource for another type of resource, and that sort of thing. So I did really enjoy all the multiple uses that they had, and I did a lot of scanning in the second game, and so discarding cards from hand, but having the right color to discard to get the sector that you wanted, that was a real big tension for me. And you can also discard cards from the open set of 3, and so seeing the card that you need in that and just hoping that someone doesn't pick it or discard it for some reason, and waiting to get to your turn, that was like a nice little tension going on. So yeah, I enjoyed the cards.
I have to give them a lot of props for how they've designed these cards, because if you were to tell someone there's 4 or 5, maybe 6 uses for the cards, I mean, that is trying to stretch it out for sure. You're trying to give an impression, but You could say that there's easily 3 uses for the cards. Often, when you do something like that with cards, it's very common to make it quite overwhelming to read what the card can do. So you're looking at this cards in your hand and you're thinking, oh my goodness, there's all of these possibilities. How the heck am I going to do this? But with these cards, it's very easy to pass what you can do with these cards. There's the little top discard effect. I don't know, it's not overwhelming. The way that they've laid out the cards, I don't know, I never felt like, oh man, super overwhelmed, and I could plan really nicely with the cards they had available. They obviously had a design intention that no card is ever useless. Like, you're never going to pick up a card and think, oh, stink. And the other thing that I loved, especially about the income system, is for a player like me, what I like to do is, rather than just form a balanced economy and play the game being able to do anything, I could just do whatever I want, tuck some credits, tuck some energy, and tuck some cards, and then I'm just rich in sort of every area. What I like to do is go for an extreme and to try playing the extreme. And so I was like, what is a game like if I'm only ever tucking energy cards? Now, there was some in-game scoring on the main track that sort of encouraged going for a strat like this, which is really fun for me. And so I tucked a whole bunch of energy cards, and that was all I tucked. And now you start with a base income of 3 credits, and you start with the base income of 1 card. But because when you pass, you're getting another card, you essentially have 2 card income per round. And I was thinking, okay, I need to make sure that each round I don't need to spend more than 2 cards, and I don't need to spend more than 3 credits. And so I found a strategy that could get by using just energy. So what am I good at? I'm good at moving around the map really fast. I'm good at landing on planets, because landing on planets only requires energy rather than needing credits. And there's also a tech tile which says, hey, when you scan, you can pay 1 energy to launch a probe. And so that would bypass the 2 credit costs that it would normally be to launch a probe. The scanning action would cost 1 credit and 1 energy. And then basically what I would do is I would do the scanning action 3 times in a round and use all my credits on that scanning action. And then I could move my probes and I could land them on planets, and I would just keep scanning and scanning and scanning. That was really fun for me to play a game where I just tried to make this all energy approach work. And it worked. And then also the next game, I was like, what if I do something different? What if I tuck all credits and cards and make my whole game plan be about buying these cards, having a whole bunch of cards in my hand, and then having enough credits to be able to play them all down. That was a game where I was off to a very, very slow start. But by round 4 and 5, I was an absolute monster, being able to play down so many cards in my hand. So this is cool. Like, there are different strategies that you can pursue just by having a different approach to what cards you tuck with income. I do have one last point, actually, on the card system. And when Shem was talking about the game at the start, he was talking about the parallels to games like Ark Nova and Terraforming Mars. And that's a really easy comparison to make, because this is a deck of 200 cards, and you're drawing a few every round, and you're trying to figure out your plan based on what cards are available. But I think a game like this had much sort of softer, rounded edges rather than the sharpness of a game like Ark Nova and Terraforming Mars. In those games, your strategy can really hinge upon getting that 1 or maybe 2 or 3 cards that you know are in the deck that will be amazing for you. In this game, all the cards are unique, but there's a lot more similarity between the cards. I found that, like, you could kind of get them to do what you wanted to do. You didn't need to see a million cards to be able to find the one card that's going to be worth 300 points. I'm exaggerating, of course. But so I think for some players, this will ease a lot of the frustration that those games can have, a game like Terraforming Mars. But also, I think it decreases the excitement of the cards as well. So it's a little bit of a trade-off there. I don't know what you guys prefer. If you prefer kind of more extreme and more unique cards in a game like Terraforming Mars, or if you like them to be a little bit more balanced, might be the wrong word, but a little bit more utility in every situation like this.
Yeah, I agree. That's definitely a different feel to those games. It's more just the fact that there's this massive deck and they're all unique. That's the kind of the end of the similarity. I think in the first game, I treated the cards like those other games, essentially. So I tabled a couple of cards quite early that were like, do this thing, like try and get this objective. I think one was for scoring, one was for like an immediate effect. And I got shafted by you two. Like, it was about scanning and kind of getting the air majority for the black stars. I had one that was like, I think it was achieve 2, of the same, and then one was like 2 points per Black Star region that you have placed a control disc in, essentially. And you guys just like back to back, like sniped me on two of those, which felt pretty stink. So I think the second time, the third time we played this, I didn't lean into those cards at all. I treated cards purely as a resource and for tactical plays. And I enjoyed it more when I went into it with that mindset. But I think you can still use them in the other way. I think, Sam, you did. Yeah, even Zach in your last game, like you both had huge end game points from your cards. So that they're still there, but I don't think it's the kind of game where you should table a card straight away and hope for the best. You should play them down as a reaction to doing well in a certain area. Maybe that's just me playing bad. But yeah, they're much more of a simpler resource. Like you said, they're not maybe as interesting as cards in those games for that reason. And I was even thinking earlier as we're talking, like, if you took the cards out of this game entirely, I don't think I would miss them heaps. Like, they're definitely cool in the game and they're great to have there. But really, I don't think the cards are the focus of this game. Whereas, say in a game like Terraforming Mars, the cards, they feel like the focus, and the board state of Terraforming Mars feels like the extra thing. Like, it's the extra little bit that you do with placing tiles, but the main thing is the cards. In this game, the main thing to me is not the cards. They're a nice extra level and extra, I guess, element of the game. And they do plug in nicely to all the areas of the game, so it doesn't feel tacked on at all. But I really think like the probes and the scanning is what feels like, and the aliens is what feels like the main thing of this game.
Yeah, you're right that the main focus is on that center planet area, which is great because it does look so appealing, you know? Like I think that's a really good point. I think where the cards are needed, obviously you're not saying they're not needed. Of course you're saying they're needed, but I think when they're needed is it allows for players' strategies to diverge. Like otherwise, if the solar system is static and we have a few turns where it doesn't move, it's like, oh, we could all just do the same stuff. And I think there were a few rounds, Shem, where like you would just do the thing that I was going to do before me because that was the way that the solar system was set up. Like it was obvious that this was a good move. And because I was sitting after you, it's like, okay, we're just going to do the same thing. And neither of us had a card that was worth tabling at that point that would change the game state enough to let us diverge from our paths.
Yeah, we talked earlier about the chaos that can come from the spinning of the solar system. I think what they've done nicely in this game is how that chaos feels like the game doing it. Even though the players are taking effects to trigger it, the cards themselves are like the players introducing chaos, which is nice because it's got these two elements which chaos often feels like randomness in games. But I like to have some chaos in games because it makes the game feel uncertain and you can't just math it out and play it from start to finish before you even start the game. So while there's this chaos that the game's introducing, players have their own kind of like agency of chaos to counter that or to introduce like their own advantages to the game where they may have been disadvantaged by the game chaos, if that makes sense.
To talk a little bit more about uncertainty and to maybe move on to another really big feature of the game. And I'm not sure if we're going to move into spoiler territory here. There's a chance we do. If we do, then we'll let you know. But the aliens in the game. Now, there are 5 aliens. And each time you play, they're going to be 2 aliens from setup, but you don't know what they are. You don't know even how they're going to change the rules of the game. And we went in blind. I think that's the recommended way to play, is that you don't even read up in the rulebook what they do or read their sheets about what they do until they've been revealed in the first game that they've been played. And this kind of brought about this sort of feeling of playing a legacy game or a campaign game. This is the best analogy I can give. Of like, oh, how's this game going to change? What's going to be the new thing? And there's this feeling of discovery in the first games we played. And then the next times we played, once we had seen all the aliens, I played enough times to see all the aliens and play with all the aliens. Then it was no longer this feeling of discovery, and it was more of a kind of just a variable setup in a Eurogame. But I found myself actually... I really like the alien system. There's lots of really cool things about it. But I think there were 2 races or species of aliens that I found myself thinking, I don't actually want to play with them again because I enjoyed the other ones way more. And so what was really cool, this feeling of discovery, and I think it's great. It's interesting that the next few times you play the game, or after you've played 2 or 3 times, you no longer have that feeling and it's replaced with a different feeling. What do you guys think about it?
So I think it's a really smart move from a marketing point of view because people often will only play a game once or twice, right? So they've covered 2.5 games of people seeing new stuff, discovering new stuff. That's pretty impressive because it was like exciting. like the first games have been like, oh, especially the first game when you just like I had no idea what they would possibly do. Once you play the first game, you kind of understand more or less how it's going to work. But the first game, it was just like, whoa, like, wow, all this new stuff. And that's just like, it's a great feeling in your first play. And it's going to make people go home having a good feeling about the game, you know? So I think it was really clever to do things this way. I do agree that in like the second game, as I already mentioned, one of them I was just grabbing their cards and discarding their cards to get the instant benefit because I didn't find that mechanic of that certain race to be fun. But I mean, that's okay. Like eventually you can just choose to exclude certain races if you don't like them. As Shem mentioned, there could be expansions in the future that add in more, so you might get that kind of feeling of discovery again. And because they're expansions, they might even do more like outlandish and crazy stuff because that often happens in expansions. So I think it was really clever, and how it kind of comes in partway through the game as well. So you've like started off doing stuff, and then it's like suddenly there's this new kind of like objective or thing that you could go for, that you could start to go after, or you could also not, because it's not like the only way to score points. And one comes in and then the other one comes in afterwards, like they don't come in at the same time. So you might also decide to like, oh, instead of actually going and doing stuff with those aliens and interacting with that part of the game, I'm going to wait to see what the other ones are, because that might work better with my strategy. So all in all, I think it's very clever and an enjoyable part of the game, but also very clever from a product marketing point of view as well.
Yeah, despite like losing that discovery factor, Sam, I think the fact that they are shuffled and face down when they come out, and how you're playing the game at that point and like what you're leaning into will vary before they get revealed. So I like how like it's going to add a wrinkle to your game regardless, even if it's a particular alien you don't think much of, like the mechanical side of things. I think it's still going to make the game feel different game to game, because you're already doing different things game to game as a player. And then how these aliens interact with what you're doing already will make a difference, I think. So like one game you might play and you think that was not a cool alien, didn't like what they added. Maybe the next time you play them, you had a whole different strategy and like it actually lined up pretty well for you to actually interact with them. So there is still some discovery of strategy, I think, within the aliens as they come out, at least. But you definitely lose that discovery of like the rule sets. But I think you also remarked in person, Sam, how it kind of, in a way, got in the way of the game a little bit when we had to like, all right, let's stop, let's read the rules. There's these new cards. So I guess that while that was kind of cool to have that discovery, getting rid of that little like interruption might be nice in future games, because like, all right, these guys are in, let's play them. Oh, we know how they work, let's go. Like actually would kind of help a bit as well.
I just want to add that I think the aliens are really good. I don't want to spoil anything, but thematically, and how thematically they tie into the mechanics of the game, was really well done and really clever. So even if I didn't love all the mechanics, I think that like thematically they tied into the game really well, and like a lot of care was put into that.
And that really is the main thing I liked about the aliens, other than just the variability and the new things they did. I really liked how they did plug back into the core game. Like one in particular, which basically, well, actually most of them did this, where they essentially took a main action of the game and made a new spin on that action. So like, you know how to land on planets? Well, here's this new thing that kind of does it as well in its own special way. I really liked that. And it didn't add too many new rules. It just said, hey, you know how you scan the stars? Well, these guys can do that too. Or these guys want you to do that too in some other new kind of fresh way. That was cool, because it means that you're not playing game A and then suddenly you're playing game B. Like you're still playing the same game. They just add this nice little wrinkle to the game as you're playing.
Yeah, and I loved the way that there were sort of 3 ways of interacting with each alien race. So there was the yellow way, which was gained via landing on planets. There was the pink way, which was gained by scanning the stars. You're sort of gaining information about aliens that are much, much further than our solar system. And then there was the blue way, which was from placing all these data chips that you get from scanning. You also get it from other areas as well, from discarding cards. Once you had filled up your row of blue, then you could pay an energy to wipe all of that, clear it off, which will allow you to place more again later. and then you get a blue interaction with the alien, whatever it's called, traces of alien life. And I think this is really fun because it's telling players that they can go for any of the strategies and they get to interact with the alien, which is one of the main thematic hooks of the game. But also, if you keep going hard on the same thing, there's going to be diminishing returns because the best spots on the aliens are going to get taken. There's a lot of little subtle ways that the designers have encouraged players to do different things. We see this when there's a landing bonus for being first on a planet. We see this when there's a orbit bonus for being first to orbit. We see this when there's a 2-point bonus for being the first to get a tech tile. All of these things, and then also actually the 2 points for being the second person to scan as well. All of these things are telling players to, hey, do something different. Get involved in a different area of the game, because if we're all doing the same thing, it's really diminishing returns. And I think that that's really lovely.
So another quite cool feature of the game that we haven't touched on too much yet are the player boards. They're a great aid, for one. Like, they kind of tell you the actions you can take most in your turn, but they have these slots on them, and they tie into those 3 core actions, the actions that let you interact with the aliens. So there's this orange bar, which lets you do all your probe actions, putting out new probes, orbiting and landing on planets. There's the pink, which is about the stars. So that tells you kind of how much you can scan. And then there's the blue action, which Sam has just talked about, where you can fill it up with data tokens to do the blue action on the aliens. The cool thing, though, is that all 3 of these areas have different upgrade tiles that you can slot into them. The main way you get upgrade tiles is by increasing your publicity and then spending 6 of it as a main action to grab one. There are 12 different tiles, but within those 12 different tiles, there's variation on the enemy effect you get when you get that particular tile. What I like about these is they're quite different in their own ways. So the orange action, when you do this kind of probe action, moving your probes around the solar system and onto planets, you're basically improving how well you do that, like reducing costs, how many you can have out there. So every upgrade you get is just improving that action. The pink action, which is about scanning, you're actually giving yourself a more powerful scan action. So when you take this action, you kind of run the line. Like, you go, I'll do this, then I'll do this, then I'll do this. And the upgrade tiles give you more of those things you can do. And then the blue ones are completely different again, where you only need 6 of these tokens, data tokens, on your board to enable placing a blue disc on a blue alien area of the board. But if you get these upgrade tiles, they kind of give you a little step down where you get 2 points regardless when you cover that new spot. But then if you place 1 more token at some point, you get this other benefit. So in one way, it slows down your progress on filling that blue track, but it can give you a lot more immediate effects. And the top 2, the pink and the orange, have very specific slots where they have to go, whereas the blue, you can kind of build it out as you please to a certain extent. I liked how these upgrades were all gained from the same way, but they all kind of have a slightly different function without being overly complex for the player to kind of decipher and figure out what to do with them. How do you feel about the player boards?
Yeah, I liked it. In my second game, I focused on grading using those research tiles, and I got, I think, 3 of each of them, and then maybe one of them I had 4. So I got a lot of them. But it's quite interesting, the temptation that you have to go get a research tile that's going to give you 2 points, because basically the first one of each stack that is taken, so in each stack, they're all the same. It's all the same type. For every player, they're upgrading the same way. But the first person to research that type of tile gets an extra 2 points. And so every time I was researching, it's like, oh, that one would be good for me, but that one's going to give me 2 points, you know? So there was that nice tension of like, oh, an extra 2 points there. Another thing I didn't mention, when you research them, they're all turned upside down. And on the back, they're giving you a nice little bonus as well. So sometimes you're like, oh, that one's going to give me 2 points, but that's going to give me the resource I need to keep going in my turn, you know? And so they give you a card or an energy or, you know, sometimes some other things. And so even in that kind of moment where you're choosing what you're going to research, it's not even always based on what that research tile is going to give you, because sometimes it's even just a way to get an extra resource. And I focused a lot on the blues in that game, and that was also interesting because I don't know if it's like tempting you to do something that you shouldn't do, like whether you should just use all your data to go and get the most points. But there's all these tempting resources that you can place another data piece onto to get an extra resource. And inevitably in your turn, you're like, I need an extra credit. So then you place the data there to get your extra credit. And essentially you are actually reducing the amount of times you can find traces of alien life through analyzing data, which is, the final action that Sam talked about on that track. And each of the other actions as well, I think they add interesting effects that are kind of necessary if you want to focus on scanning or probes. They kind of add some necessary upgrades.
Just on the data point, actually, another thing the designers have done, and that we found this with the cards, that there's no cards that ever go to waste. There's no such thing as a bad card because there's so many uses for it. I also found that with those blue tiles, but also other areas of the game with some aliens and other things, that they gave you lots of ways that you could use your data. Like if you had surplus data, you could keep running that line and paying in energy to clear it. But if you had the blue tiles, you could spend more data on your way to filling it up to get more resources. Or you could do what Shem did in one of his games where he just spent like 3 extra data every time he interacted with the aliens and got a ton of points. So I thought that was quite a nice little touch that, hey, this resource, which for some players, if they haven't built out their blue board and they don't have much energy, is quite a weak resource. You can still lean into getting it and spend it for cool stuff. But on the player boards themselves and the tech tiles, I've wanted for a long time to design a game where you have only, let's say 12, like this game has 12 tech tiles, and those are in every single game. And as a Terra Mystica fan, like you'll see that this is a thing in Terra Mystica, and I find those really fun. But as a designer, for some reason, I want to put in 20 or 30 or 40 and make them vary each time. And I think there's value to both approaches that, a game like Paladins, for example, there's not tech tiles, but there's townsfolk who are doing similar things, right? And in a game like that, we've shuffled them and made them in a deck so that you never know what's going to come out, and each game it's going to be different. In a game like this, you just design 12 tech tiles. You probably design what's the best for the game. And then you don't have the danger of any of these powers becoming convoluted. You also are more likely to balance them better just because you're going to see them far more often. But in a game like that, they have to get around the problem of what if there is something that is better or all players want to do that. And that's where they've added in both the immediate bonuses for a little bit of, there is still that variation between the tiles. They do the same thing ongoing, but they're going to do something different straight away. And the 2 points like we've already discussed. So I think they approach this like set tech tiles that are in every game in a really cool way. And it just makes me want to experiment the game more and getting better with each of the lines of play. Tim, how do you feel about that? Like about a game where there's set number of tech tiles or abilities that are in every game that are available to all players? I guess a game like Hadrian's Wall does that as well in a different way.
Well, like as Zach kind of mentioned, a lot of them are kind of essential to that action. So like on the orange one, for example, one lets you have up to 2 probes in space rather than just one. That makes landing and orbiting cheaper and lets you kind of move through asteroids better. And lastly, like lets you actually land on the moon. So without those tech tiles, you can't actually play the game to its fullest. So they really do feel essential. Like you wouldn't want them removed from the game. I guess the blue ones are kind of the weird ones where they could be more variable, but then there's actually not that many levers in the game to pull to make them more variable. So they are what they are. But no, it's good. I think it's a nice way to have that engine building and variability from game to game with a simple rule set, like without adding too many rules and a massive appendix of all the 50 different tiles you can get in the game. Because they've definitely taken an approach in this game, it's quite obvious, to, sounds harsh, but dumb down the rules, to simplify where they can as much as possible, which like I see the value of it for sure. Like it's definitely like makes the game far more accessible in a really good way. You do lose some other areas of the game, such as balance or scaling, but it's quite obvious to me that they've made this decision as a product that they're going to make this game as accessible as possible for the weight of the game, and they've nailed it. Like they've done a great job of it. But as we'll talk about soon, I think it does have its drawbacks in other areas of the game. So I think the tech tiles, with that kind of mindset of simplifying the rule set as much as possible where they can, I think they've done a great job of keeping those tiles in, because they could have easily made them even simpler and removed some if they wanted to. So it's great that they actually kept what they are in the game, despite other areas of the game clearly like trying to pull back stuff.
It's not such a bad idea having this variability in the tiles when you've got so much variability in the cards, because I think if you were like, oh, here's a million different tiles that you can get that do different stuff, and then you've got like, here's a million different cards you can get that do different stuff, it does become slightly overwhelming for the player. So I think it was probably a wise design decision.
And the designers don't have to spend lots of time on Board Game Geek answering questions. Is this tile broken? Like we get with Ezra and Nehemiah. So, that's just a massive W. Hey, we like to put variability in our games. There's going to be some that are slightly stronger than others, but that's part of the fun. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room then, the one that we've been alluding to for a bit, and that is the player scaling. I played the game at every player count apart from solo. And I think I'm right in saying that this bothered me the most out of all of us, that I was really bothered by the fact that there was really hardly any player scaling in the game. So all I can think of for player scaling, and what I mean by scaling is changing the rules slightly and set up slightly for different player counts to give a more uniform experience across the player counts. So what I remember of the scaling in this game is that at 2-player and 3-player, there's an extra sort of neutral disc that gets placed out when players cross certain point thresholds to make sure that the aliens show up a little bit earlier. And the other thing is that they put extra cards in the deck for when you pass each round. And that's it. All that I can think of for player scaling, that's it. And so there are all of these areas of interaction in the game that I'll point out that don't have scaling. And for me, the problem was that I played this game at all these player counts and it felt very different. And what I mean by that is different in a bad way. Not like there was a lot of difference in game to game based on what players were doing as well. And that's great. That kind of variety is good. But I got the feeling of like, what is the true intended version of the game? Like what level of tightness were the designers after? Is this a tight game or is it not? Because at 4-player, it felt like a very tactical experience where the moving of the planets, like Zach suggested earlier, is kind of random because there's so many ways. There's 3 players acting before you. There's so many ways the planets could move outside of your turn. In 2-player, it's much more cat and mouse that you can respond to each other. It's kind of more known. You can see what's going on. In other areas too, at 4-player and at 2-player, there's the same number of orbit and landing benefits for being first. So you're just going to get fewer of those at 4-player. You're not going to be first to land or first to orbit anywhere as much as you are in 2-player, just because there's the same number of spots. Same thing with the tech tiles. You're going to get these 2 points way more often at 2-player than at 4-player. The scan mechanic, I found at 2-player that it was just very hard to complete these scans just because there's fewer players that are doing the scans. And so there's not those same element of being able to tactically cheese and take one of these scans away because there's lots of people doing it. And the other thing with 2-player scanning is that because there's fewer players that are doing scanning, the second place reward for scanning of keeping your disc out there in that region, that's not going to matter because you're probably not going to fully scan that one again. It's probably not going to fully resolve again. Whereas in 4-player, that benefit is quite nice. Also, the same number of alien slots at all player counts. So at 2-player, you're just going to get more and more better ones. So you're going to get higher scores. All of this made me feel like there wasn't enough, as a player, there wasn't enough care and attention given to every player count. That it bothered me quite a bit because I was like, what is the intended experience of this game? Is it supposed to be random and quickly moving and very tight and low scoring, or is it supposed to be very open and high scoring and slowly moving and more strategic? And I don't know how to answer that question. So it is a trade-off, as Shem was talking about. Maybe we want to talk about that trade-off. But for me, where I land as a gamer and as a designer on the trade-off is trying to make the experience at all player counts more uniform, and that might mean some more setup rules, perhaps.
Yeah, I think it is quite clear from the rulebook. Like, it's a really good rulebook. It's laid out like a comic book almost. Like, there's so much empty space, so much graphics. It actually made the game very, very easy to learn. So well done to them for that. But I do think it's quite clear to me, at least. I could be totally wrong, but from what I can see, they've deliberately just cut out rules to make it more accessible, like I was saying earlier. So I think the scaling is probably one thing that took that. They probably thought, you know what? The game still works without scaling rules, because it does work and it's still enjoyable. But there are certain areas of the game that do feel vastly different, which is the issue. For me, the biggest one is the scanning of the stars, because I think, Sam, we did like 3 or 4 sectors in our 2-player game, and we did I think every sector maybe at 3 or 4 player and multiple times, which is that's a big part of the game with the pink. That's where you get the pink little alien things from. So if that's not happening, then you just can't really interact with that column of the aliens, whereas you have total control at all player counts of, say, landing on a planet. It's going to be more chaotic to move around the solar system, as we've already said, at higher player counts, but no one can really stop you from gaining those yellow points. Likewise with the blue, like you get that mostly from scanning anyway, which is kind of a strange interaction in the game between those two paths. But again, like you're always getting those data tokens when you scan and from other means. No one can really block you from that either. Other than, of course, the spots on the aliens themselves. There's definitely blocking there. But they did feel fairly open at all player counts to me. It wasn't like you ever really felt that there wasn't something good. And all the aliens did have these kind of overflow areas where you could place tokens if you got blocked. And even at full player, we never saw them be used, I don't think. Maybe, Zach, you did once because it was the best option. I think it was. So, yeah, that was the biggest drawback for me, was the scanning stuff, because you're trying to hit these majorities and they just don't get hit at lower player counts. Like the simple scanning rule, right? It's like you put a dummy token in there at every one on the feather space and they trigger more often and it doesn't get removed. But I really do think that they probably said, look, that's one rule too many. Let's cut it out, which is kind of sad from the point of view of a player who wants to play it a lot. For the player who just plays it once or twice, like sadly, like most board games these days, it makes no difference, really. Like they might play it once, a 2-player, once a 3-player. They're not going to notice these big differences game to game between those two games. So, like, I get why they would cut those rules out. I understand it, and I'm not saying that they made the wrong choice. Like, it's I get it, and I think what I will say is I think it's a nice change to see in the industry. I'm not saying that every game should do this, and we won't be doing this in every game either. But I do like that it's like another voice, another option. Like, hey, you can do this. It's okay to ignore player scaling if you want to. Like, as a publisher, it's okay to do that. Now, there's going to be drawbacks, but you're allowed to if you want to. And I think that's good that publishers can do this, because there's a lot of rules that we feel we have to follow as designers and as publishers. Like, you have to do this stuff. You have to add a solo mode. You have to do this. You have to appeal to this audience and blah, blah, blah. It's nice and refreshing when they just go, you know what? Nah, we're not going to do that. We'll do our own thing. Thank you very much. And then it offers a nice, fairly easy to learn, yet medium weight kind of Euro resource game. So I think in one sense they nailed it and they did a great job of that. And then there's all these other like personal things where I'm like, but there's this one thing I don't like. And, so it's a funny one.
Yeah. So as a pushback to that, as a publisher for you, how hard is it and how much does it distract to put a little variant in at the end, like additional thing? Do you think that just overcomplicates the rulebook? Does it add too many pages? What do you think?
Well, I personally don't like variants in games at all, because like you were saying before, like what is the intended feeling of the game? So I prefer not to have variants anyway. I think we've had a few edge cases, like so Architects, where we've made the variable player boards to be a variant essentially, but I think most people just play with them anyway. Some people won't play with them ever because that's their way of playing. So yeah, I don't know. Like you said, there's so many things where you could just like, it's going to be one paragraph and that rule is added. But I think they've just said like, where can we cut? Like what is essential, what's not essential, and they've made a rulebook which is very easy to get through.
Yeah, I feel like it would have been so easy for them to do those dummy tokens, like you said, in the scanning. But I imagine the decision was like, we're just not going to do any. Like, it's just cleaner to not do any scaling. Like, I feel like the scanning is something where I'm not a big fan of house rules, but where I'd be very tempted to house rule it at 2-player, because like I enjoyed that mechanism, and if I'd be a bit sad if it's like not very present anymore. So I'd be very tempted to house rule that and just put in a number of dummy tokens according to like how much data there is in there. But I can understand them making that decision, just being like, maybe it would be good to put scaling there, but then we should probably put scaling also there, and then probably also there. So instead of having that kind of chain effect of being like, if we put it there, we probably should have put it there and there, just like none of it at all.
Yeah, interesting point about house rules. I wonder like if there's any story there, right? Like, has this designer or CGE had some experience with this? I've always seen house rules, people always make their own rules for things, and they just thought, you know what, they can make their own rules this time if they want to, because it's not worth the extra rules in our book.
But the thing that makes me like agree with you, Zach, is that we're already getting these neutral tokens out of the bag. They've already started to try and scale the game. We're getting these out of these discs. That's the most annoying part is, when a game gets you to get out another player's pieces and you're like, okay, I'm going to have to take this out of the box too and get these pieces out. So we've already got them out. Like, let's just put them on those spots. We're having to refill with data anyway. Like, it's not even more work. I don't know.
Yeah, it would
Man,
only
like,
be in the
this
setup, right? It would only be put in
Yeah.
these tokens in the setup, and then you're just going to be refilling data into the other spots. So, yeah, I agree. Like, that's one area definitely where I would absolutely prefer scaling. Another area that you failed to mention, Sam, is the end game scoring goals do not scale according to player count. So there's the same number of them out for every player count. I didn't really like those gold scoring tiles in terms of how they worked and how the player that was further ahead was getting the best benefit out of them. How did you guys feel about those?
Maybe it is time to talk about the other little elephant in the room. There's two elephants this time, and that is the point scoring, right? Like, that's something that we all felt was a bit odd. And I've seen this in games before where, like, they just dish you out points like crazy, right? Like, massive amounts of points. You're going to score. In this game, our scores vary from, I think, we saw some scores below 100 for our first plays, but in our last game, two-player, I think the scores were 213 to 200, I think it was. So the scores are going to be close to 200, probably lower and higher play counts, but they're just massive point numbers. Like, there's a planet, like a moon, I think it's 26 points if you put a probe on that moon. Like, that's a huge amount of points. And we talked about this a bit in person after our second play, I think it was. And I was saying to you guys how, like, the game feels fun to play because I'm making all these tactical moves and trying to manage my resources. And I'm having fun trying to do the puzzle. And then it's like I get punched in the face by 25 points from the side I wasn't expecting. It's like the points feel disconnected to me in a way where I feel like the game wants me to make cool decisions, play well, and it's going to reward me the points along the way. But instead, you should play to try and greed those points. Like, it's all about the points, and that feels odd to me. The counter to this is the game we talked about previously, which is Cooper Island, where most of the game you forget about points, right? You're not even thinking about points. There are some tactical moves where you might, like, get that helm point to move onto a space to get a little reward. But most of the part, you're just doing the cool puzzle and having fun doing it. And at the end, you're like, oh, I got 18 points. Like, I didn't realize we're going for points, but that's cool. I had fun. Whereas in this game, the points are like thrown at you constantly, massive amounts of points. And it's got a lot of issues with, like, the rich get richer going on, where the first person across this threshold, the player who's winning essentially, gets more points, and that just can snowball like crazy. Sam, you pointed out, I think in our second play, that from what you could see, and maybe we were wrong, but there was no place that just gave you 1 point, right? Like, there were some odd numbers in there, like 5s and 3s, but there was no single points, which makes you go, why not just half all the points, right?
Exactly. Why not divide it all by 2? Because nearly every action you're doing that gets you points gets you something else as well. So if they really wanted to balance it, they could have just given a resource or whatever a point is worth. Just divide it all by 2. Then we're not having to do 2 laps of this thing when we get 200 points. Make 100 a good score. When the points are so high value, I know we've talked about this before, I start to lose respect for them. I don't treasure my every single point that I get like it was hard earned. Give me 25 points. It just feels a little bit ridiculous to me. That's just a personal taste. Maybe people love that feeling of being rich in points and having these massive turns. But yeah, it just felt a little bloated and disconnected. I agree with you there.
Yeah, I do wonder if it's like a decision to address like player psychology or something like that. I think us as designers, we find it more frustrating than maybe the average player because we're like, why? Like, it's unnecessary. And as you said, Sam, like, they start to lose their value or whatever. But maybe they're just kind of playing on the fact that maybe people feel good when they get 10 points or 25 points or whatever. It's like, oh yeah, 25 points. Whereas if it was 10 points, it might not sound as good, I just wonder that. I don't know that. I don't know the publishers. I don't know the designers. I don't know who made the decision for the number of points. And I don't know if this was the reason, but I do wonder that.
Here's another thing as well. So you get these gold scoring opportunities 3 times around the score track, right? But when you lap it, you don't get them again. So that's a rules question, though. That's a rule that has to be explained and taught. So if they just half the number of points, players aren't going to lap them and get the opportunity again, and then you don't need the rule. Like, it's this weird thing for me where it actually makes the game simpler.
I guess one pushback would be about just from a tactile point of view of if you make the points larger, it means that the tokens are going to get spread out more evenly on the board. Like, rather than just like a constant stack of pieces going on top of each other for the first like 2 or 3 rounds, people are going to spread and stuff. So that's, in a way, it's a good thing for a track where you might be bumping the pieces over. So there's that consideration. But Zach, we started out this little talk about points because you talked about those gold scoring tiles. And I think if you listen to any of our other episodes, you probably know that we're not that keen on multiplicative scoring because it just leads to like massive blowouts. This was a bit of an issue. I honestly, as a player, was not playing these well. And I think the way to win the game is probably to play these well. Like you need to actually go hard into these, get the biggest, leftmost scoring bonus and milk it for all it's worth. Zach, you mentioned, I think it was after the first play, about how you'd almost prefer that the player who gets there first gets a lower one. That might have its own issues, but it was kind of odd that the player who's already winning is getting more points. Obviously, they have to lean into it, but they're getting first dibs. They're going to choose something they're probably doing well at anyway. And yeah, it's just I don't know. It's just these multipliers can just be problematic in board games.
So you gave me a bit of pushback on that, Shem, saying like maybe everyone's supposed to have the same amount of points and etc. So if you pass them, then everyone will at least get first on one of them. But what ended up happening in our first game is that Sam was just so far ahead in points, is that he got like 2 of them by the time that we had 1 of them, or something like that. 3 of them. So I think one of us didn't even get to be first in one of the tiles, and so like maybe that's just because we suck at the game, but at the same time, it did not feel cool that the person who was winning the game was getting to mop up like all the highest points scoring on the final objectives. And it just felt the rich get richer, which is generally something as a designer that you want to avoid, because you want to make players feel like they're still in the game, even if they're behind on the score track. Like they've got a way to get back into it. They've still got a chance. Whereas at that point, it was like, well, Sam's won the game, and let's keep playing for 3 more rounds.
My argument for them, and I agree with you guys because I'm the first to say that I hate multiplicative scoring, but I think the things that they did well was firstly giving players direction and facilitating unique play styles. So I saw that there was one that allowed me to just score off purely tucked energy cards or tucked credit cards. Tucked credit cards, get them out of your wallet and chuck them under the cards. And so I was like, okay, well, I want to go for these energy cards and I want to see if I can make this play style work. And that was cool, that facilitated a really interesting game plan and it gave me direction. The other cool thing about them, and the reason I think why the designers would have gone with this, is that same thing that they've been trying to do this whole game, and that is encourage players to do different things from one another. And they do that. So one of them is like, well, you're going to go for tech. There's always something that's techie related. And so for the player that gets the high scoring thing of that, they need to push publicity some way or another and run after all these tech tiles and go for it. So I like that intent, the intent for players to do different things, because then when you're playing the game, you get to see, wow, he's playing a slightly different game than me, and she's playing a different game from me. And that's cool and makes you want to play again and try those different strategies. But the runaway leader thing is problematic. So I like a lot of what these do, but I also find them problematic. It's a trade-off for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't have taken those tiles out of the game if it was me designing, but I probably would have done something where something happens and in reverse order people get to be first on one of the tiles or whatever, just some sort of way to make it so that the players who are behind feel like they have that chance to come back. They're like, if I can pick the one that's going to be good for me, and if I can smash it, then I might be able to catch up to Sam, who's way ahead of me, and so I think that's what that was missing in the game, that kind of sense of feeling like I was going to be able to make up those lost points.
Which is what kind of brings it back to my first point about you just want to enjoy the game and the puzzle of it and figure out cool moves, but then the game's like, no, get points, hurry up, land on that moon, get those 26 points, because if you get that, you get first dibs on this thing. That's the one I didn't like in the game. I like the game a lot, but that's one part I didn't like, was where it's the game is one hand saying enjoy this fun puzzle, but on the other hand it's but also get points, because I know that sounds like a silly thing to say because most games are about getting points, but it's more about how it directs you to get them as a motivation. It's telling you go and do this thing that maybe isn't what you wanted to do necessarily, but you should do it because it gives you lots of points. That's what I didn't like, where it's you kind of feel like you're kind of playing 2 games. One is about enjoying the puzzle, playing your turns, being tactical, figuring out cool moves, and the other game is about greeting points. And I know as I say it, I'm sounding like that's every board game, but it's something about the motivation of getting the points that I don't like in the game, which kind of throws it for me. And it's It's the big blowouts. It's the massive multipliers at the end, like 11 times for this thing or whatever it might be, 8 times for this thing. It's just too much. Definitely a modern board game in that sense. Like this is quite a recent trend. Well, even not that recent really, but a lot of games that just give you tons of points. I'm not generally a fan of games where you score over 200 points because it just feels odd and wrong. And like Sam said earlier, it kind of takes away from those 1 points that you got earlier when, I rushed to get that upgrade tile, so I got 2 points. And then Sam's like, cool, I'll get 26 on my turn. In the last game we played, Sam, I think I had one turn where I think I got something like 43 points on my turn because it triggered a bunch of things. Like it landed on this thing. I got the alien thing to get placed. I cashed in these tokens to get this thing. And like it fired off all these little objectives and things that ticked off. And like, that's a huge turn. And my 2-player score was 200. Like, and one of my turns was 43 points. That feels off to me, right? That feels off.
A fifth of your points from one turn.
It's funny, man. Like you can't please us. The game designer's like, bro, you should be happy. Look how many points I just gave you. And you're like, no, it's too much, man. I'm going to take it back. Give some to charity, maybe. I don't need all of this.
Overall, there's a lot of cool stuff in this game. Like we've talked about, there's really cool things that like are little twists and little changes. I'm a huge fan of Boss Runes of Arnak, and this game, after reading the rulebook, made me feel like it was going to be a very similar kind of game. Same publisher, obviously. Different designer, but probably the same development team, I'd assume, involved in it, probably the same playtesters and stuff like that. So I think it will appeal to that kind of people who like Arnak. It's very accessible, which is a great thing. Big plus for the game. It looks great on the table. Lots to explore. So yeah, well done to CGE and the designer. And yeah, there's obviously some things we talked about there which were kind of iffy for us, but that's why we do this podcast, right? Let's talk about the things that seem off or things that need to be digested and thought about and dissected. So it was a great game to play, and I'm looking forward to playing it some more in the future.
Yeah, I'm excited to play it again. And I think at the end of the day, that's what decides a game for me is like, do I want to play it again? Or do I not want to play it again? Just even talking about it, I'm like, I'd love to try the blue board strat again, but maybe just not get any of those extra resources and just try and pop that off a million times and tuck a whole bunch of cards. So, there's lots of different, after playing it 2 times, lots of different strategies that one could take. And I'm excited to try a different one out next time.
Also, thank you so much that the first player marker just moves around clockwise. Thank you. That's fantastic. If it's not broke, don't need to fix it.
Maybe there should be an action that you can take where you can get the first player.
No! We hope you've enjoyed our discussion about SETI, but we'd love to hear from you. Jump on the Garphill Games Discord and let us know in the podcast channel if you've played SETI. What did you think about the use of cards in the game? Let us know your thoughts on player scaling and points. So, to everyone who already listens to our podcast, we have a brand new segment here to finish off our podcast. So we've started posting on our social media a board game dilemma once a week. Now, in our podcast, we obviously don't publish once a week, but we will discuss these dilemmas and mostly we'll discuss some of the comments, the responses to the dilemmas. So this recent dilemma that we posted was only be able to play games that take 3 hours to finish or that last 30 minutes or less. And we asked you all to tell us which you would choose and why. So I have some comments here, and I'm going to be reading them out to Shem and Sam to see what they think. So Shira Lane, he said, my sweet spot for game length is about 75 minutes, but almost all games I play take longer. When going to a game night, I always take and hope to play big meaty games, knowing that it will take 3+ hours. But the best thing about short games is that you can play them back to back. Nothing as fun as when you finish a good game and everyone looks at each other and asks, let's play another one. So even my short games, I would rather play them for 3 hours.
I don't know if I want to play 3 hours worth of short games, though. Maybe once or twice now and then. I've done it. I remember one night, a few years back, we did a game night for like 3 hours of just fillers, and it was fun. But I would not want to do that on like a regular basis. Like, if we're sitting down for 3 hours, let's play something big and meaty.
I do agree, though, that the best feeling in board games is when people say again, and you all want to play again. That's lovely. And I think that's something that I've missed from time to time as we've gone out to explore more and more new games, as our shelf of shame grows and grows and grows, or opportunity grows and grows and grows. I miss coming back to games and just playing them and then going again, which was the experience we had with Citadels when I was in the band with Shem, and I was a much more of a noob gamer, that was fantastic. We would just play it back to back to back, and a meta developed.
So Warren Powell has a slightly different take on this, where he says, sometimes it seems like some of the 30-minute games I play last for 3 hours anyway. Depending on how much analysis paralysis there is going on, or rules explanations, clarifications, and the inevitable restart when we got it wrong anyway.
It's brutal. It is rough. There's always the case that like a game can take longer than you expect, but 30 minutes to 3 hours is a bit of a push, right? Like I remember seeing comments about, say, Viscounts, I think, which should take you about 60 to 90 minutes usually. I remember seeing comments about like 4 or 5 hour games. I'm like, what are you doing wrong? Like, what rule have you missed for that game to go that long? But I have also played games with agonizingly slow players, which sadly will drag out the game a lot.
Yes, I agree. I do struggle a lot with slow players, although, you know, every now and then I can be a slow player. So, you know, I guess you shouldn't judge too hard. On a more serious note, Warren Fletcher says, it's an interesting dilemma, but I would say 30 minutes or less simply because my main gaming partners would be my wife and children, none of whom have the same interest in long games as I do. So my preference would be to choose the ability to play games with them. Good job, Warren.
I agree.
Yeah, that's a massive factor, right? Like who you play games with. Games are ultimately about the people you play them with, right? It's a way to spend time with friends or family or loved ones. And so picking games around what you know other people enjoy is a good way to go.
On the other hand, Jamie March said, 3 hours for me. I do understand the limits that places on who and how often. It probably eliminates my wife ever playing with me again. But I love this Crunchy Heroes so much.
No comment.
Warren is making Jamie look bad. Let's just say that.
Dice Spire says, if choosing the 3+ hour games meant I also got granted the time for those games, then that'd be my go-to. But life as it currently stands, 30-minute games win out.
Dice Spire is living in a Doctor Who sort of world, right? Where
Then we got a couple of people. So Raw or Nothing said 3+ hours is a must. That's the only answer, apparently. And Sam Houghton 90 said the right answer is 3 hour plus games. So some people...
Okay, that's the right answer. Right.
That's the right answer.
Case closed. There we go. Thanks, Sam.
So actually, on the general, survey, I think more people said 3+ hour games. But I do wonder if that's because our followers on social media are used to playing our games, and our games probably go closer to 3 hours than to half an hour most of the time. So
follow-up question then for the two of you is the same question, but around design. You can only design for the rest of your life 30-minute games or 3 hour plus games.
Well, that is a tough one. That is a
That's
really tough question. I would probably go with the 30 minutes though, and I would try and make those 30-minute games deep. Like that would be my objective, I guess, because if I start going only 3 hour games, yeah, it's a lot of playtesting, right? Like you have to play it 3 hours at a slot to finish the game. I like to make games that lots of people can enjoy, but you're isolating a ton of people if you go 3+ hours.
Yeah. That's what I would say. Do you want to go broke and not do this as a full-time job, but then design only 3+ hour games? Because I mean, you'd have to have a massive following that love those games to be able to, because like there's a way smaller market for longer games. Even though the more people on our social media said 3+ hour games, the reality is in the world, most people will be willing to play a 30-minute or like a short game under 30 minutes. Not that many people in all the world are willing to sit down at a table for 3 hours to play a board game. So yeah, you'd just be cutting out your ability to actually make a living, I think.
I would love to answer 30 minutes, but I just do not think I'm good enough at that craft. Like that's a really tough skill, is being able to make great games that are short. So I really respect that, and I would love to be able to do that. But I mean, I guess answering that way would force me to hone that craft and learn. So yeah, I would love to push myself in that way. But then again, I also want to design games. My sort of one of the philosophies is that games that could be someone's favorite game. And I just think that there's fewer people that would have a 30-minute game as their favorite game. Yes, there will be people that would disagree, but I think that it's more common that a bigger epic game is more memorable and more of a kind of favorite style of game for people than what can be done in 30 minutes.
Yeah, well, one of the comments that I didn't actually write down here on my list, but was saying all my favorite games are 3+ hours, and I couldn't give up playing those. So, you know, it's exactly your point, Sam.
Thanks for listening to the Lens and Veil podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Garphill Games. You can follow Garphill on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X, and YouTube, or by joining the Garphill Discord server.
So what are we going to do about all these elephants in the room? Is there elephant extermination service, or what do you do to remove them? I love elephants.
We'll be in trouble with the animal rights people.